Apple's latest chip, the M1 Ultra, is practically two M1 chips duct-taped together, making it the company's beefiest M1 chip yet. The Ultra is noticeable due to the fact that Apple claims that it can perform comparably to most pleasing graphics cards in the market, such as the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3090, while using far less power. But is all this actually true, and is the M1 Ultra excellent for gaming? Well, let's find out. Since the debut of the Apple M1 in November 2020 and the following announcement of the M1 Pro and M1 Max variants in October 2021, the Apple M series of system-on-chips has been definitely expanding. Apple has released yet another variation of the M1 subset of processors, the Apple M1 Ultra, in March 2022 at the Apple event. It is worth noting that Apple claims that this new processor is the most efficient and advanced of the entire M1 silicon family. When the first generation M1 was released, it was already an overkill, and the M1 Pro and Max respectively stepped it up even more. The M1 Ultra now, which can be found in the all-new Mac Studio, is a step above the rest. The architecture and specs of the Apple M1 Ultra. The M1 Ultra is a significant advance over the M1 Max based on 5nm processing technology, RISC architecture, and the more popular ARM architecture. Specifically, this chip is the result of combining two M1 Max chips. According to Apple, the M1 Max was created with a quote-unquote secret high-speed interface, which enables it to pair with another M1 Max chip. Apple refers to this chip packaging as quote, Ultra Fusion, and describes it as a connectivity issue that allows two processors to function together as if they were one. The number of GPU and CPU cores respectively, memory capacity and bandwidth, as well as the operational processing capacity of the neural engine and transistors are doubled whenever two M1 Max chips are combined, so as to make the M1 Ultra. So here are a couple of the new M1 Ultra's features. A new CPU. The chip's basic configuration includes 20-core CPU-based ARM bigs. There are 16 Firestorm cores with high performance and 4 Ice Storm cores with low power consumption. The M1 Max has a 10-core CPU with 8 Firestorm cores and 2 Ice Storm cores. The GPU. Believe it or not, the M1 Ultra features the most processors in a single integrated graphics implementation out of the entire M1 series family of Apple silicon. This 64-core GPU is a significant improvement over the 32-core GPU in the M1 Max and 10-core to 16-core GPU in the M1 Pro. The Neural Engine. Neural Engine cores have increased from 16 in the M1 Max to 32, and it has a 32-core Neural Engine which can perform trillions upon trillions of operations per second, allowing for more powerful machine learning. Random Access Memory. The Apple M1 Ultra also has an LPDDR5 6400 SD RAM with up to, get this, 800 gigabytes of memory bandwidth available in 64GB and 128GB versions respectively. Apple's unified memory design even allows memory to be shared across the chip. Media engines and ProRes accelerators. This chip, like the M1 Max, includes dedicated sophisticated digital engines and a ProRes accelerator engine that allows for quicker professional video processing while also maximizing battery life, but with now twice the capabilities. Believe it or not, it can record up to 18 8K ProRes 422 video streams. Custom Apple technologies. The chip also incorporates a display engine that can drive multiple external displays, integrated Thunderbolt 4 controllers for increased I/O bandwidth, and best-in-class security features such as hardware-featured security boots, secure enclaves, and runtime anti-exploitation technologies. Is the M1 good for gaming? Apple has come out to claim that the M1 chip is the best and most powerful that it's ever been, and that it's going to be the ideal thing for gaming, even compared to the RTX 3090. Which, by the way, is a testament unto itself, because the RTX 3090 is the best in the market and has a high performance even for gaming. So, is Apple's claims even valid? Apple's latest and finest in-house chipset is the M1 Ultra, which Apple claims to be more potent than even the RTX 3090. And while Apple is best known for its iPhones and Macs, it also produces some of the most cutting-edge computer chips. Apple's chips are, for the most part, among the best in the industry, whether it's the A15 Bionic in the iPhone 13 or the M1 in the iPad Air 5. This has been true of Apple's smartphone CPUs for a long time, but it's only been true of Apple's Macs since M1 was announced in 2020. Following the release of the M1 Max in November 2020, Apple has now released the M1 Pro, M1 Max, and M1 Ultra, each with more processing power than the last. The M1 Ultra is still the fastest Mac chipset that Apple's ever manufactured, and Apple does believe that the M1 Ultra GPU does outperform NVIDIA's flagship RTX 3090 in graphics performance. On paper, that's quite a bold claim, but does it really hold any water? The GPU specifications of the M1 Ultra are nothing short of outstanding. Don't get us wrong, the standard version contains 48 GPU cores, with the maxed out version having 64, and it even boasts a total memory bandwidth of 2.5 terabits. The RTX 3090, on the other hand, offers less than half of the memory bandwidth at 936.2 gigabits per second. In one of the recent promotional slides for the M1 Ultra, Apple states that the CPU outperforms the RTX 3090 in terms of overall GPU performance while utilizing only 200 watts of power. It's easy to believe that the M1 Ultra's GPU is considerably superior to the 3090 just based on those stats alone. But realistically though, that's not the whole story. The M1 Ultra and 3090 each have their own strong suits. There is way more to the tale of the tape than Apple's marketing may claim, as there are things that just aren't typically the case for every single person. The M1 Ultra has tremendous memory bandwidth and uses far less power than the RTX 3090. That is not to suggest that the M1 Ultra is incomparably superior to NVIDIA's GPU in gaming and everyday tasks, because while Apple's M1 chips are excellent, they are best suited more for specific activities, if you will. The M1 chip shines in applications like Final Cut Pro, Safari, Photoshop, and others. This is specifically true when you're using an app that was already built extensively for the M1 architecture. So, if a program were designed to operate natively on M1, then it's most certainly going to perform better than anywhere else. And that's true of the original M1 when it was released, and is going to be true all the way through the M1 Ultra. However, there are several factors and situations where the M1 CPUs would fall short of GPUs like the RTX 3090, most notably gaming. According to a recent post from Digital Trends, the M1 Ultra should potentially be able to operate a game like, let's say, Fortnite for about 240 frames per second in 1080p. In comparison, the 3090 can run at 1080p or even 1440p at 260 frames per second, and higher. Albeit that's just trying to even find a game that runs natively on the M1 Ultra. Because not only are Mac games few and far between, but getting one that runs natively on M1 is a lot more difficult. And that's why it's critical to see past Apple's marketing gimmicks. Is the M1 Ultra really equipped with that many GPU cores, a large memory bandwidth, and even a power-saving design? Absolutely. However, this does not imply by any stretch of the imagination that it's the finest gaming GPU available. The M1 Ultra will undoubtedly be an excellent chip for anybody that does end up purchasing the Mac Studio. But it should not be mistaken for a replacement for the RTX 3090 or any other graphics cards for that matter when it does come to actually running games. Many of Apple's, and for that matter any other firm competing in the hardware arena, performance promises don't always convey the whole story. Companies tend to cherry-pick benchmark results so as to make their goods appear better than the competitors, which is why independent evaluations are a valuable resource to examine before ever selecting what works best for you. Things are starting to come into perspective now that the first independent reviews have been released. The Verge, for example, conducted several benchmarks, including NP Bench, Python, and Geekbench, along with various Puget and gameplay tests, with some exciting results. The M1 Ultra's CPU exceeds the M1 Max's and the 28-core Intel Xeon W in the spec'd-out Max Pro, but its GPU falls short of the RTX 3090's computing capabilities. The Verge had achieved a Geekbench 5 computer score The Verge achieved a Geekbench 5 compute score of almost 215,000 points using a PC with an Intel Core i9-10900, 64 gigs of RAM, and an NVIDIA RTX 3090 GPU. The M1 Ultra in the Mac Studio, on the other hand, scored a little over just 83,000 points, or 102,156 points when utilizing Metal. That's still an outstanding result, so The Verge dug deeper into the shadow of the Tomb Raider's gaming performance. Apple's hardware is infamous for not being optimized for gaming demands, and the M1 Ultra is no exception here. NVIDIA's dedicated GPU reached a decent 108 frames per second at 1080p and 96 frames per second at 1440p, giving it an 18 to 31% advantage. The M1 Ultra GPU's 100-watt power envelope and how it shares memory bandwidth, along with the CPU, could account for a lot of the difference. The RTX 3090 has a TGP of 320 watts on its own, and the Core i9-12900K can provide another 241 watts on top of that. Other Apple Silicon chipsets, such as the M1 Pro, have a similar story. They're excellent in terms of performance per wattage, but they do struggle to keep up with more power-hungry 86 hardware, especially when it does come to gaming. Early benchmarks of the M1 Ultra indicate that its performance per watt is excellent, although GPU performance lags well behind specialized GPUs like NVIDIA's RTX 3090. So, is the M1 Ultra even suitable for gaming? Not in the least. A dedicated GPU like the NVIDIA RTX 3090 would really be the best option for you at this point. So with all that being said, thanks so much for watching today's video, and if you enjoyed it, then please consider giving us a big thumbs up. Also, subscribe to the channel if you want more content just like this, and don't forget to ding that notification bell so that way you don't miss out on any more content updates from us. Until next time, folks, stay safe and stay informed.